guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the cabin. Today I've got to sharpen up my Stihl chainsaw, and I'm going to show you how to sharpen a chainsaw very easily so that it cuts just like a brand new chain. So stay tuned. The first thing you need to do before you sharpen your chainsaw, make sure that the chain is not loose. This is a bit too loose for sharpening, so I'm going to tighten this up so it's nice and snug. Alright, now that the chain is tightened, I'm ready to sharpen it. The first thing you need to do is find your starting point. So this is your tip number one, okay? When you sharpen a chainsaw, you have to inspect the entire chain. Look for the tooth that is the most damaged. That's going to be your starting point. The reason is, if that tooth takes, say, 7 strokes of the file to sharpen, then every tooth will need 7 strokes of the file. Okay, that way you're sharpening your chain nice and even. So I've gone ahead, I've inspected the chain, I've gone through it. This chain is not in bad shape. There's no damaged teeth. I haven't hit any rocks or anything like that. I haven't run it into the ground, so I have no damaged teeth. So I'm going to use my starting point right here. And what I recommend, take a marker. Okay, mark this tooth. That marks it as your starting point. That way you'll know that where you start, and when you see that, you're done. The next thing to do, if you can, is you should use a vise to lock this bar in place. If you don't have one and you're out in the field, a piece of wood will do. Get the right size so that it is under the bar and it keeps that. See how solid that is? So that's not going to move around when I sharpen it. Okay, before you start sharpening your chain, it's important that you know a little bit about your chain. This here is called the top plate. This is your cutting corner. This is your depth gauge or your raker, and this is a very important piece. So I'm going to come back to this in a second, and this here is your gullet. All right, now you'll notice that on this top plate, it comes back at an angle. Okay, this is your depth gauge. It's important to know that the distance between here and here, okay, that's the chunk of wood, the bite out of the wood that this chain is going to take. Now, here's a big mistake that people make. No matter how they file their chain, they generally try to file this tooth, and sometimes they do a decent job and it's quite sharp. And yet, the more they sharpen this, the worse their chainsaw performs. And the reason is because as you file this back, the distance between here and here gets less. Okay? And it takes a smaller and smaller bite out of the wood. A lot of people neglect the depth gauge, or sometimes called raker. All right. Yeah, a lot of people don't even think about this, and this is very, very important. So a lot of times when people sharpen their chain, this is a very common tool. This is a simple guide with a file in it, and it does have markings on it, so you can line those up so that you can correctly file the teeth. Again, you should have a second guide and a flat file to file these depth gauges down. And there is a number here that is also important. And you can, I don't know if you can pick this up on the camera or not, but right here is a number, okay? And that number is 3. That is actually the distance that should be maintained between the top of this depth gauge and the top here of this tooth, okay, of your top plate. So in this case, that's a 3, and that means 0.03 inches, and that's the depth from here to here. Yeah, I've actually had people bring me their chainsaws and say, well, you know what, man, this is it's just not cutting well. I don't think I'm sharpening the chain right. And actually, a lot of times they're doing a decent job on the chain. It's just that they're totally ignoring the depth gauge. And so I'll say, you know, you didn't file down the depth gauge. A lot of times they say, the what now? And so it's kind of common for people that don't use chainsaws a lot. They don't really know about the depth gauge, but that does have to be filed down. You have to be careful though. Don't file it down too much. There is a specific distance that it's supposed to be for best performance and safety. If you file them down too much, what happens is you risk a lot more kickback. Also, your chainsaw may not perform as well because it's taking too big of a bite out of wood. Now, I have to say that there are some professional loggers that do file those depth gauges down quite a bit, especially if they're going to be cutting softwood like spruce and pine and that type of thing. And the reason is because softwoods generally have less resistance than hardwood, so you can get away with that, filing those depth gauges down a little bit more. But you know what? Leave that to the professional loggers. Most people should file them down to the recommended depth, and I guarantee you your chainsaw will perform very, very well. And if you keep those filed down, it'll cut just like a new saw. Now, on with the sharpening. Most people, like I said, they use a simple file or file with a gauge. Some people just use a file, and I know guys that are really good with just their eye, and they can sharpen a chainsaw, man, like nobody's business with just a file. Well, that ain't me. So I always used to use one of these, but not anymore. I would never go back to one of those. So what I use now is this. This is, let's have a closer look at this thing. So this is actually made by Stihl, and it's made in Germany. And what this is a 2-in-1 sharpener. So it has 2 round files, one here and one here. And then it also has a flat file in the middle. And the idea is that as long as, and it also has these, see these guides? So you can't go wrong. So the idea is, okay, here's how this works. You have 2 round files and 1 flat file in the middle. Depending on which direction you're going, the round file is going to sharpen your tooth, and at the same time, the flat file is going to file down your depth gauge. You can see here, it does have some marks. So if you put this line on this side of the tooth, and that line on that side of that tooth, that will give you the perfect angle. So now all you have to do is hold this, okay? Sits right on top of these teeth, and that helps, acts as a guide. And then all you have to do is just draw that across at a perfect parallel 90-degree angle, and you'll get a perfectly sharp tooth every time. Well, all right, that was easy, and it only took me a couple of minutes to do. That's what I like about it. It's very fast, and well, there's only one last thing to do. Let's test it out. Okay, that's really cutting good. I'm real happy with the results of that. As you can see, when I put the bar of the chainsaw on that log, it literally pulled the chainsaw in and down without any effort. And that's what you want. That's when you know you have a sharp chainsaw. Also, if you look at the sawdust, okay, see how big those chunks are? That's another reason. That tells me that chainsaw is cutting really nice. So a lot of times if you see like a real fine sawdust, that means your chainsaw is not cutting well. It means it's dull. Probably means that your depth gauges or your rakers are not filed down enough, so it's not taking a big enough bite out of that wood. And you can also see when some people are running a chainsaw, it's almost like they're trying to cut it, almost like they're using a knife and they're sawing back and forth. And you shouldn't be doing that with a chainsaw. With a properly sharpened chainsaw, if you just set it on the log, it will literally pull itself in and cut down without any effort on the part of the operator. Anyways, so that's the Stihl 2-in-1 chainsaw sharpener. It makes sharpening chains so much easier. It's a really well thought out device. Stihl did a good job with that one. So I got to give it 2 thumbs up. And I recommend that anybody that runs a chainsaw, go pick one up and give it a go. You won't be disappointed. As a matter of fact, you can even order them on Amazon, get them at your local chainsaw dealer. And yeah, just so much easier to use, and they're very fast. So that's it for today's video. I want to thank you guys for watching. If you're new, subscribe. Don't forget, you got to hit the bell icon if you want to be notified of new videos. Also, if you don't mind, give me a thumbs up. I appreciate that support. Leave me some comments below. I love reading those comments, guys. Keep them coming. And we'll see you next time back here at the cabin. And if you ever need to replace your files in this, it's very easy to do. This end here just flips up. And your files come out. You can take the files out and just slide them back in. Get a new file, slide it back in, and you're good to go.